August 2023, reported by Sonatype, a Python pypi package that called VM Connect was downloaded over 200 times before taking down eventually. It was mimicking to the legitimate VMware vSphere connector model, vConnector, which apparently had 45,000 downloads monthly. And there was a small little difference. In VM Connect actually contains malicious code that allows attacker to potentially run arbitrary code on the user's machine to collect the sensitive data and further to intrude to the network. It's your open source, folks, not someone else's. Now it's June 2024. Visual Studio Code became extremely popular among developers, even in commercial companies, because it's lightweight, it's free, it's customizable, it supports AI, of course. And most importantly, it has a massive extension marketplace. Dracula Official is a very popular color scheme for various applications that has tons of downloads. Apparently, malicious extension was mimicking to Dracula Official. And again, it contains payload, which allowed to collect user data, credentials, system information, and etc. from the developer's machine and send that away to the command and control server. The good news is that was a just research project done by one researcher, but it proved the concept that it could happen in the real life. It's your open source, guys, not someone else's. Welcome, survivors, after the rain yesterday and the good party for today's talk. My pleasure is kick off the second day. I'm Roman, by the way. I'm from Intel, and I'm responsible for software security, and also I'm security champion for Linux Foundation UXL. First things first, the opinions expressed are solely my own and not necessarily reflect the official position of my employer. Please don't sue me after the talk. And today we are going to talk about your open source and how to hack and defend with examples and with open source tools, of course, some tips and tricks that you may take away and use in practice. Now, what's on the picture? What do you think? Any random guess? Wake up this morning. That's not the one question I prepared for today, but this is the number of GitHub organizations that belong to Intel. Actually, you can see, but the gray ones, there are also organizations, but we cleaned them up a little bit about 1 to 2 years ago. So we could imagine that Intel has thousands of open source repos that we are contributing. That's the answer to the question that you may have, why Intel actually talks about open source, because we are a large open source consumer, and also we are the large open source contributor. And this is for several historical reasons. We have 20 years of contributions to open source, and #1 contribution to Linux kernel, #4 overall contributor to the open source. Also, we are engaged to the several initiatives that are around open source and specifically in security. Our kind of huge friendship with the Linux Foundation is evolving. I personally engaged to OpenSSF, and our folks are present in pretty much all the famous foundations that's under Linux Foundation umbrella. And I mentioned I'm security champion for UXL, which stands for Unified Acceleration Foundation. Here to open source the tools that allow to run code written once on all the accelerators across the CPUs, GPUs, and FPGAs. Pure open source free libraries for everybody. So that's why we have some experience to talk about. Now, who uses open source in production? Okay, I didn't see the 3 hands raised up. Probably you are not aware about that yet, but everybody uses it, of course. And this, some statistics in place. I just wanted to show you that one of in 8 open source downloads have known risks according to the respective company's on type. Unfortunately, another good number is almost 90% of code bases contains at least one open source vulnerability, and this is survey that's been done by Synopsys inside the companies. So it's actually according to the code base scans inside the company. Now, a few decades ago, we have been talking that software is everywhere. That's absolutely true nowadays, of course, but now open source is everywhere, dependent on which survey you are looking into. Around 70–90% of the all software is actually based on open source. I think this is not a secret. What I found really interesting that this is a relatively new paper, I think released sometime in spring by Harvard Business School. They claim that without open source software, companies would have spent $8.8 trillion to write the software from scratch. So this is roughly the market cap of the open source. Now it's massive. And another illustration of this, kind of one of my favorite meme, all modern digital infrastructure actually relies on some popular libraries. And if you understand what I'm talking about, XZ nightmare that happened early on this year, after all this Log4j, zlib, and other catastrophes that we have that poisoned or vulnerable open source repo became available to everybody. XZ actually, the vulnerable version of that was extremely fast ingested by the most famous open source Linux distributions. That was the biggest takeaway of that. So now, I think this is the typical picture how we actually do our software development. It's simple. I simplified it. Actually, I found the simple picture. And you can imagine that risks could be at each stage of this cycle, right? It could be bad code. It could be compromised source control. It could be even malicious employees. It could be packages that are poisoned, etc. But the point is that for your certain organization, for your certain use case and the cycle and the practices that you actually use, it would make sense to focus on the risks that matter for you, because not everything may be applicable for your organization. And I really like this picture. This is the link. If the text is small, then you can follow up by the link. This is the actually great summary by Anders Labs representing top 10 open source software risks. I mean, there are a lot of catalogs, but this is short and concise. And you can, for example, examine it and find, okay, non-vulnerabilities in third parties is definitely my risk, but you know, I am not releasing anything to open source, for example, right? Rather only consume it for my organization. Those, some of the risks may not be applicable for me. So please just don't blindly follow everything, but focus on the risks that are mostly applicable for your organization. Now, how to start handling like open source risk? I think it's worth to have a look at the industry best practices, and I've prepared a curated list of the materials that I personally can recommend. The first bucket is kind of you must have a look, if not already, to at least these 3 frameworks or best practices. OpenSSF, we will be talking about this a little bit later. S2C2F was also good. framework for understanding and comprehensive analysis of the kind of open source risks. Quite recently, earlier this year, VASP released their product security capability framework, which is also connected to the topic. Worth having a look, very technical, very structured. I like it. Other materials worth reading, like this four in particular. This is more or less the benchmarks, and yesterday I think some of them were mentioned. A good industry best practices that you can use depending on the type of the software development that you actually do, and just the rest of the materials that's also worth to mention. Among others, there is CNCF, for example, so Secure Software Factory that's specifically dedicated to kind of cloud security and these considerations. Again, all the links are available, so you can just grab them and follow. All right, this is kind of the theory. What's about practice? Do you have any idea what's on the picture? Any random idea? That's a great point. Actually, this is secure development lifecycle. This is simple. I told you my questions are going to be really simple. At least this is an Intel takes. So how execute it. The reason why I show you it because, of course, handling open source risk is a part of the overall secure development lifecycle that may or may not exist at that level, at that scale, like we have in the large companies. But if we can kind of map open source security to this cycle, it would look like this. At least for us, it consists of the several topics: secure development, build and release, maintain production, secure sourcing, community engagement, and SBOM. Each of these topics deserve a separate presentation. I'm going to briefly focus on the three of them: security sourcing, build and release, and briefly touch on SBOMs. It's a massive topic, but I think worth to mention at least. Now going closer to secure sourcing, I promised you the hacking part, and this is kind of my curated list of the most common attack techniques that's been seen in the wild. First of all, dependency confusion, and the easy example of that. Again, this is all based on true stories. In the NPM ecosystem, there used to be analytics PayPal that's again used to launch malicious scripts to make DNS requests to command and control malicious server and run data exfiltration. Now deprecated, of course, but sounds like legitimate. And that was again big deal among the industry. So this is dependency confusion type of attack that is really common still among the package managers. The second one is type squatting or masquerading, and I was referring to that at the very beginning of the talk. AI, right? It's everywhere, so it's basically not an exception from the open source risks that we have been seeing. Eleuther AI instead of the just legitimate one that was a fake LLM model was added to Hugging Face. Of course, had a lot of downloads, a lot of implementations, but this is what it is. Trojan injection and protestware. How much of you are familiar with Dependabot? Very good stuff, right? To bump up the dependencies, automatically basically searching for the new versions or outdated versions and spotting on the CVEs vulnerabilities that may be present. Basically, that was the kind of malicious version of Dependabot that could be seen like a legitimate one, but it was not. And that malicious version of Dependabot that, of course, is taken down right now has been doing malicious pull requests that's accepted, but contains infostealer as well, like automatically because we trust Dependabot, right, as the developers. That was a big deal, and this Trojan injection is also a common technique that's used in the wild. And finally, my kind of personal top list. This is repo or package hijacking, and the true story that could be behind this as an example is a Koa. Koa is the very famous command line option parser, 9 million weekly downloads, etc., was hijacked over NPM account takeover. Basically, the malicious actor taking over the account and inject some malicious stuff into the core. So this is also very, very popular technique that we should handle. Now, turning into the defense part of it. First of all, when it comes to secure source and to ingest your third parties from the open source, the first thing that I would suggest to do is assess these third party repos that you're ingesting from. Sounds really simple, but in fact, it's just a must right now, and I've been seeing that not everybody does this yet, but I would highly recommend it. And one of the most famous and brilliant tool is OpenSafe Scorecard, which is basically the risk assessment tool that consists of some individual checks that represent industry best practices. These checks are kind of very, very simple, like branch protection, like whether you have security MD file, like whether there are no kind of CVEs or dangerous workflows enabled, something like that. Token permissions. And usually it's not a big deal for third-party repos to fix it, to follow these best practices. So that's the industry kind of golden standards is to have OpenSafe Scorecard equals or above 7, which is good. I think this is a little example on the slide as you see one of the Intel's libraries. It has 9. If I'm not mistaken, which is also good, but it's really easy to achieve 5 and above. It's not really a big deal to achieve 8. Above 8, it's really could be time consuming, but just following the best practices, this is good. It works with GitHub and GitLab repos, which is pretty much handy. You can use it in many ways. You can utilize graphic user interface that you see on the left-hand side of this slide. Really kind of user-friendly. You can run it automatically via GitHub Actions. You can run it manually. You can use Docker container. You can call it with REST API. And there is a new tool that recently was added to the OpenSafe Scorecard called Scorecard Monitor with auto notifications, auto PRs, the fancy reports, all these charts and tables, which is really, really good stuff for automation. And again, this is all developer-centric, so you don't need kind of your lawyers to look into it or some other guys. So it's pure made for developers and could and should be automated inside the lifecycle. Other best practices, rather than OpenSafe Scorecard, that's I hugely recommend to use when you ingest in your third parties. Check repo maintenance cadence. At least it should kind of have the tagged releases at least per half a year. To my experience, it depends on the project how much releases they have over the year, but at least one per half year. It's a good example of the well-maintained, well-supported repo, and check it's actually maintained and supported. And that's exactly what's happening with XZ, basically the 1.5 maintainer for this repo that have been saying constantly over the years that I'm tired. I probably don't want to support this anymore. So this is a red flag, right? So despite it's really popular, it doesn't mean it's secure and good to go, and it will hurt you later. So please keep that in mind. Check for CVEs, for known vulnerabilities in the repo, and pay attention to vulnerability research. This is a really important topic because if there are no CVEs at all reported for this repo, it also may not sound really good because it basically means that maybe nobody just had a look into it yet, right? check other stuff, what's in security, MD file, examine repo documentation, maturity, like whether license is in place, whether contribution rules are in place. They're all a good indication for the good open source repo. Again, not directly connected to security, but indirectly, it's connected to the good to the healthy open source dependency that you're going to ingest. And at scale, if you're in a big company, of course, it's a big deal because it's the thousands of them are ingested. Do all kind of possible verifications if they are in place. For the relatively big companies, it would make sense to curate and mirror locally critical dependencies. If you definitely know that that's the kind of, you have 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 most popular dependencies that you consume like, on a daily basis and widely used in your organization, it probably makes sense to mirror them into your internal repo so that mitigate the risk of unavailability or to make your own changes into this repo if needed. And finally, kind of don't do the weird things. It's more like development good practices. It's to my experience, it usually makes more sense to build everything from source if it's possible. But I still see that people linking all these pre-built binaries like jar files or DLLs just because they're used to and they're available. But if you can imagine the level or the large scale of the supply chain, so if you link your binaries to your eventual product, it takes time also to kind of fix all of these binaries by those vendors, so it's endless chain eventually. Building from source is actually a good practice, again, if you can afford it to yourself. And a few free tools I also would suggest for this. Secure health check, I mentioned scorecards and other tools are available dependent on the ecosystem and also kind of can give you a brief sense for the framework checks. Chainbench, for example, checks for CIA's software supply chain security benchmark, which is good. Use kind of local package management. Again, it's dependent on the ecosystem that you use and the resources that you have to support this, but it's a good practices. And dependencies and CV detection, updating, a lot of tools out there. This is kind of my personal favorite list of the tools that are proven to be working in practice, at least for me, at least for us. Again, dependent on the use case. For containers, we have some kind of fancy tools like 3V and others. For other dependencies, we have again Dependabot and other scanners, and actually we have a couple of Intel tools that are available in the open source security tools. For example, one of them it's Intel's CVE tool that checks your binaries for non-CVs, and actually this is a big deal because I don't know too many tools that are available for free that can check your binaries for CVs. Checking source code or packages, that's not a big deal, but binaries, this is like tricky. All right, moving forwards at the build and release stage, we also have a lot of troubles, but I'm going to show you one single example. Again, it's based on the true story and the real scenarios that I've been seeing among the industry. Developer, right? The typical setup that is usually used, the companies, or it doesn't matter, small or big company, the kind of source control manager like GitHub could be used as the SaaS service, and the developers do commits and pushes and executes their workflow in some Git repository that is inside the company, right? We all use clouds, we all use this hybrid style of working. And yeah, all of these major players, they offers to run CI jobs, right? Runners, whether from the marketplace or your own, which is a good thing. And sometimes it's going to the internal network because sometimes you need to use so-called self-host runners that are executed locally inside your network on your machines. not in the cloud or in the GitHub, because you need more control of the hardware operation system, do some specific tests that are kind of you want to keep confidential, for example, or inside the company, and this is a good feature, right, of the GitHub, for example. What could go wrong here? Probably the kind of the less can go wrong if you use so-called ephemeral runners that perform one job at one time and then gets vanished. And also, it's good practice to disable auto-update option for these runners, because you never know when or whether you're going to get your kind of malicious workload to this runner, but it's enabled by default. So unfortunately. So long story short, if attacker kind of can make a malicious push to the open source repo, for example, that's you maintain or that's available in the open, that could trigger internal runner that can live inside your trusted boundary, inside your internal network. And if it's non-ephemeral runner, which in contrary doesn't stick to the one job and contributor with previously PR approved ever can trigger it. For example, malicious actor can just submit some PR for documentation first and then is getting trusted, and then they can trigger pull request. What then can go wrong? Runners, if it's malicious, can check out the attacker's code and push it as a workflow and eventually establish the connection with the attacker server, for example, or run remote code execution or malicious code into the inside the network, and then you can even imagine what bad can happen then with the lateral movement of the network. Sounds complicated, but unfortunately, it's easy to execute in practice. So how to handle these cases and all other cases that are that belong to a build and release phase? There are a lot of examples, but in the sake of time, I'm going to summarize the best practice for build and release when it comes to handling open source risk. Right? Remember the topic. Isolation. If you're using self-host runners, do your DMZ inside and don't allow the access further internal infrastructure. Harden operation systems, review access, do the proper token management. I still continue to see that people use SSH, for example, by user and password credentials instead of enabling kind of tokens and keys. Right? Why you use steel passwords? I don't know. Enable two-factor authentication whenever possible, less privilege, etc. And if you're attentive enough, you could notice that this is kind of all the good practices that are here for ages, unrelated, to be honest, to the open source or not. But I highlighted it on purpose because often, especially if it comes to the developers who, of course, have the more flexibility, it's just not the common sense. So we need to educate. We need to apply these best practices. Leverage Git permissions and branch protection. Again, the basics that you can find in all of the documentations for the Git, GitHub and GitLab and etc. Use ephemeral runners. Scan binaries for CVEs and malware. Again, even though you scanned maybe third parties when you ingest in it, when you process and build your own binaries, then it would make sense to scan them again for CVEs, because layered approach, something bad can happen even at this point of time during your CI/CD, during your build and release process. Again, even though you may have the clean third-party dependency that you are ingesting, it may be poisoned at the end of the day during the cycle. That's why it would make sense to scan it again, right? Double check supporting infrastructure scripts, one of my favorites here, and we have heard the brilliant talk yesterday about these kind of checkoff and other tools that can help you to scan configuration files for Terraform, for other kind of infrastructure developments, YAMLs, JSONs. All the tools are available right now that helps you actually to identify these. because all the infrastructure right now as a code, right? And if you don't check it, it could make you more troubles in the future. And of course, connect logs and alerts to monitoring systems, whether you have the InfoSec team that's supporting you or you don't have. It would make sense to collect all the logs to monitor what's happening in order to spot on the malicious action sooner rather than later. And it's all related to the open source development as well, because sometimes I continue to see like people reinventing actually these practices, because it's just okay. Previously we done like the normal I don't know, IT stuff, IT infrastructure, but right now it comes to development, it comes to open source ingestion or open source development, and people try to reinvent something that is already should be taken in account. Free tools that could help you on this journey are repo and runner settings check, OpenSF scorecards can be used even internally at this phase as well. You can check it out. Use secret management tools, use secret scanning tools, right? It's very important. I didn't touch on this in the hacking part, like the secret stealing, but it's also kind of common practice, so that you may want to utilize these tools for secret scanning tokens and etc. that may be exposed and actually are exposed quite frequently. Maybe you don't know about it, but it's there. Use classic network security and scanning tools that's been available for a while, and again, unrelated directly to development lifecycle, but are useful inside that. Just keep it in mind. CV, malware, script scanning, also a couple of tools here. Container specific, I mentioned briefly. You can check it out later. Now, how much of you at least tried to ingest S-bombs? Okay, I have a couple of hands. Yeah, and S-bomb stands for software bill of materials, right? Basically, the inventory of the package of the dependency, right? What's inside, what our dependencies it has, and yeah, when it started, that was like a silver bullet, right? I got S-bombs right now, so all problems are solved because I know whatever I consume, I know the CVs inside that. But for those who raise their hands, I have some of bad news for you. It's because it's not that good right now. I mean, S-bomb concept is great, and I'm pretty much sure it's evolving, and later we will see better outcomes out of this. And we, of course, use S-bombs, and I encourage you to use that. But this is a little of research being conducted in 2023. Actually, 77 package versions are identified incorrectly among the overall tools. A huge number of kind of false positives. That's because of the several reasons. Again, the building S-bombs is a big deal. We do this at Intel, and I can tell you it's really difficult. But of course, you should start this journey. You should take them and you should evaluate them because we will be there. I believe in the concept as it is, but take it with a grain of salt, of course. Like don't rely on it as a single point or single guardrail, something like that. Always double check. But some of the considerations around S-bombs that you made, 3 reasons why you may want to ingest S-bomb. I mean, there are simple reasons: inventory, automation, which is really, really important for developers, right? Because this is really the tool or the concept that should be used inside the development lifecycle, not for the policy reason, right? So, policy guys at Intel, please forgive me, but it's really made for automation. Don't be obsessed by the format. Just pull something. I do understand that we have a lot of formats. The 2 kind of major SPDX and Cyclone DX and it's still not clear which is better for each case. Validate as bombs. If you ingest in that, validate that it's actually genuine. Create your own. If you build some software, try it, create it, just to understand that what you have been built is actually what's in fact is, right? And leverage ingest in VEX, which stands for Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange Format. This is not new concept, but I think getting traction over the few past years. This is the additional information that's been provided by vendors along with SBOMs, basically to say that we are not affected by this third-party dependency as a, I don't know, Red Hat distribution, for example, or another Linux distribution, because we don't use these malicious functions or we applied mitigation. So even if your scan shows that there are a couple of dependencies that are vulnerable, we claim or assert we are not affected and provide the reasons why. So this is all getting more and more traction today, and I highly recommend you to look into it as well. At least have a look, and then you can dive deeper and etc. Now, key takeaways that I wanted to leave you with after this talk. Don't be afraid to scan this QR code. It's not malicious, actually. Trust me. Don't trust anybody, but you can trust me. This is our product security report that we do annually. And this is the latest version, contains a lot of practices, insights, and good stuff that we do for product security, how we execute it. But the takeaways, be on top of hacking techniques, follow these, because awareness is a key for the future success of defending. Highlight your own open source risks, because not everything may apply to you. At least be educated on what the risks are and try to compare them or measure your company or your project. Just doing what leaders do solve actually about 80% of issues. That's why I advocated OpenSafe Scorecard, which is open source tool, and I'm not selling it, of course, but it's kind of contains best practices that you probably really would like to follow, right? Some of them could be arguable, but it's a deeper conversation. For the majority of stuff, that's enough. And automated, because security is now, like over the decades, but now at least it's developer friendly. It should be, and this concept should be delivered to all the developers inside your company. It's actually dev-centric and should be perceived from that perspective. It's not like checking the boxes and say, oh, it's green, it's good to go, but actually provide the value and automated capabilities. Now, I couldn't leave you without a little bonus for today's session. Would you like to see the bonus, or? Huh. Yeah, good. Thank you. This is actually Open Source Security Index, a very popular portal that highlights the most popular and fastest growing open source security projects on GitHub that are free. And it's a little bit small, but you can see the famous projects over there, like from the top of the list. Some of them are obviously Vault, Cilium, a good tool, OpenSSL, of course. Like one of the famous one, we see Kcloak, Trivi here, etc. What's on the first place? On the first place, actually this is rough, nice application security tools for Python linting. This is, I would say, relatively new, but it's getting traction, it's really good. What's more interesting is the next place is the kind of vulnerability management tool, Nuclei templates, which is really good. But my question to you is, what's on the third place? Any guess? Good point, actually. Okay, another guesses? Something random. All right, intrigue. at the third place, actually, this is Metasploit framework, which is the most famous hacking tool that represents. And actually, it's the most famous tool overall related to security from the open source. So please be aware of hacking stuff and follow the news and follow the practices. Because at the end of the day, it's your open source. Take care of it. And yeah, happy to answer questions. Thank you.
So Roman Zhukov, thank you very much. If there are any questions from the audience, you can take it. One moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are all capabilities available currently as specifically OpenSSF scorecards is the really live and evolving project. So it has all the automation in it. You can integrate it easily to your CI/CD and basically check it on whatever cadence you want, daily, monthly, weekly. OpenSSF itself updates their scores for GitHub repos on roughly 1 week cadence. So you can adjust to this cadence, but again, it's highly automated, and with this a new contribution like OpenSF Monitor, you can automate it like from the start to end, having it baked naturally to the, for example, kind of GitHub flow, and it could provide you the reports on whatever cadence. It could provide you pull requests if you would like, so you don't need to actually, I don't know, touch it manually. So it's all automated.
Are there more questions? Okay, then I think...
Too much for this morning, right?